Salam sejahtera dan selamat pagi. Anda bersama saya Hafizi Rosli dalam Buletin AWANI. Berkuatkuasa hari ini, Majlis Keselamatan Negara MKN beri kebenaran untuk operasi restoran dan kedai makan secara dine atau makan di kedai. Namun ia tertakluk kepada Prosedur Operasi Standard SOP yang ketat. Bagaimana kebenaran ini memberi nafas mula kepada industri makanan dan minuman atau F&B ini? Dan bersedia menerusi Skype adalah Jennifer Ong, Pengasas dan Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Hospitality Asia Hapa, serta Muhammad Hisham dan Abdullah, Presiden Malaysia Food and Beverage Executive Association. Dan izinkan saya meneruskan tembual ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Good morning both of you and thank you for being with us. And I would like to start with you first, Jennifer. Jennifer, tell us how restaurant owners reacting to yesterday's announcement in regard to dine-in customers. Is this a good news?
Well, I think, of course, they are all relieved, to be able to open up the restaurant for dine-in, although it's only for 2 packs, but it's a good start. And we appreciate the government for looking into this. But, of course, you're talking about a Chinese New Year season. And, family reunions, gatherings are always more than 2 people. And, it's a balance of, okay, yes, it's good, but at the same time, it also poses a lot of restrictions to families who have more than 2 members living in the same house. So, but, to your question of, whether F&B owners are happy, yes, they are. Of course, they are relieved that the dining has opened up.
Jennifer, in your opinion, will this help with their sales?
Well, of course it would. It would help to some extent. But like I said, you look at the capacity of the restaurant, different sizes of restaurants, some with smaller capacity, some with bigger capacity. And to have 2 to a table is not so much restriction in terms of capacity in a restaurant, but restriction in terms of customers coming out. Like I said earlier, people with 3 family members, 4 or 5 or 6, it will become very inconvenient to them to have to worry about can we have 4 people going to the same restaurant but sit at different tables? Because at the moment, yes, the opening up for dining is there. But again, I want to stress, the problem is always the clarity of the SOPs, the clarity of new rules that's being implemented. So even for me, I have like 5 people in the family. So my question is, how do I seat 5 people in a restaurant when I only can do 2 to a table? And at the same time, there was no stipulation about whether the same family members from the same family can dine in the same restaurant, although we're seated at a different table. So because of all these uncertainty, again, people will tend to get reserved and said, nah, forget it. I don't think I would take a chance to go because there's no clarity in what we can or cannot do. And particularly during Chinese New Year, you don't want to get fined and upset the entire celebration. So I think there will be an additional of income and revenue, but I doubt it would be too big, or in terms of during this period, which I must say, Abizi, this is one of the best time for F&B businesses during the Chinese New Year period, and that has been, sort of taken away. So it's not going to help a lot, but it will help to a certain extent, yes.
Okay, so we would like to hear from Hisham's perspective. Hisham, share with us your thoughts on the SOP for this new development. What do you hope to see?
I don't consider this as a new SOP that announced by the senior minister yesterday. It's basically the same SOP with allowing 2 diners per table, which is, I will not even take this as an SOP per se, but more on the guidelines for the F&B operators to actually ensure each table not being seated more than 2 persons. But not all restaurants set up are the same, because they are based on the themes and concepts. If you take Chinese restaurants, usually they are set up our round table with different sizes. So it will not be practical for them to sit 2 persons in a round table, which is a 5 feet. Can the table be shared with other customers? That is the question. So the clarities and precise of the SOP do not describe, the do's and the don'ts for compliance. Having the restaurant, some restaurants is having 3 or more design of the tables. With 1 meter physical distancing, with different table design in the setup of restaurant, it's very, very difficult if the operator itself are not well versed about the arrangement of the tables. Because most of the operators assume that the 1 meter is tables to tables, which basically is not true. It should be chairs by chairs. So there is no issues on arrangement, whether it's horizontal or vertical. But if for medium size to big size round table, the 1 meter will be a challenge for the operators itself. Yes, we agree that the operators must be responsible to assign 1 staff to man the entrance at all times to ensure all patrons adhere to the stipulated SOPs by having their body temperature taken, scanning my suggested QR code, or to do manually writing down their details for the purpose of contact tracing. But what I hope to see is that the guidelines that announced by the government maybe after this will be more precise of what do they mean by 1 meter physical distancing, because they have to give guidelines to all these operators, guide them how they want them to set the tables, everything. Because now just basically mention 1 meter with physical distancing. So everybody is having their own definition. Everybody is setting up. As long as it's not congested, the operator think that they have met the SOP.
And Hisham, do you believe restaurant owners and staff will adhere to the new SOP, and do you think enforcement should be stricter this time around?
I think the F&B operators are disciplined enough. They will strictly adhere to the SOP implemented by the government. Because if they do not adhere to the SOP, they will face the consequences. They will be penalized, they'll be summoned, everything there, which I don't think they can afford to do so. So instead of going against the SOP, better work around with the SOP, get clarifications from the relevant authorities. Hopefully, everybody will have a win-win situation.
Okay, so back to Jennifer. And Jennifer, the number of COVID-19 cases is still quite high. Do you think customers are confident enough to take advantage of this new development? Will they come out to support this restaurant?
Well, I think there is a mixture of feelings. There are definitely a group of people who would say, no, we don't want to take the risk. We don't want to go out. We want to stay home. We want to take, home delivery or take away. And there are some customers who say, okay, at least now we can go out, but then, we have to, of course, adhere to SOP and maintain our distance and whatnot. So it is important to have, both ends look after. And it's a juggle. You've got to look after the safety of everyone. At the same time, you also need to look at the livelihood of businesses and, of course, employment. So like what Hisham said, as long as the SOPs are clear, very, very specified categories SOPs for certain categories in terms of having a table of 10, having a table of 4, having a table of 2, what are the clear guidelines, and that everyone should take responsibility in following these SOPs. It's not just on the operators, but also on the customers. So like I said earlier, if the intention of going out for dining is to celebrate Chinese New Year, obviously you're not going to get table for 2 because people don't celebrate your reunion dinners or Chinese New Year celebrations in 2. So if you allow, people to go out and dine for the sake of saying, okay, it's time to go out, it's time to get used to this virus, it's time to get used to the SOP and make it part of our living, then yes, people start going out to get accustomed to it. But it's during this period that people are frustrated because it is a very important celebration for the Chinese community. Visiting their folks, visiting their grandparents, these are all very traditional things that people want to keep up to. So yes, we are all concerned of the numbers to make sure that it doesn't spike again. But at the same time, you're talking about humanity, you're talking about human emotions, you're talking about family gatherings, and stuff like that. So striking a balance would also mean to have superb clarity on the guidelines of what is allowed and what is not allowed so that everyone can do their part and be responsible to keep the numbers down. but at the same time being able to go back out to live our life normally again. So I really urge authorities and government, like what Hisham said, to come up with very, very specified guidelines so that categories of restaurants like Chinese, Western, Indian, Malay, Mama, whatever you call it, will know exactly what are the things they need to do in order to keep their business going, at the same time regulate the safety part for the customers. And I also urge all the people out there, all of us as Malaysians, right, we need to take responsibility. We need to follow the guidelines and not insist that we sit, in a large group or gather in a big gathering without social distancing, without physical distancing. So that's a responsibility that we all need to take, as a country.
Okay, Hisham, just a few and just a short words from you. Will this new announcement help restaurants with banquet facilities and hotels?
I think it definitely helps, but it's not so much on the banquet facilities because banquet facilities all set up usually around tables. Hotels, they have their own SOPs for all their F&B outlets. Hotels, I think they will abide and adhere strictly to all the SOP because they also have their own very stringent SOP in place at all times. But the SOP that in Malaysia itself, we have 100 over associations represent different F&B operators and their brands. So I like to emphasize that it's a time for the government to reach out to all these associations, have a dialogue session, get clarity from there. Because for Indian Muslim restaurants, they would like to have their own SOP. For the Chinese restaurant, they also have their own SOP. For Indian restaurant, Malay restaurant, all of them will come up with their own SOP. So it's up to the relevant ministry to actually read through, then have a dialogue session, and then maybe the association, the Malaysian F&B Executive Association, can play their role to assist the relevant ministry to actually read through all the proposal SOPs submitted by all the relevant operators. Hopefully we can meet halfway and then apply a new SOP so everybody will be happy to adhere to. And then the enforcers on duty, they also must understand and knowledgeable when they carry out their duties. Because when you issue penalties to the operators, they will ask you, what is my mistake? They only say 1 meter social, no 1 meter physical distancing. But when you ask them to demonstrate and give a guideline, they are unable to do so because they are also very confused about the SOP. So enforcer is one thing. I think the government also must set up F&B portals to educate all these F&B operators. Then also be giving flexibility to the operator itself.